So this is Accessibility New York. This is our May meetup. We have been looking forward to having Chris Noel here today to talk about accessibility in New York City parks. We haven't ever had any topic on this about accessibility of parks, so I'm again looking forward to our discussion and the presentation. Just before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, ThoughtBot, for the space here where we host the event, SSB Bart Group, who funds our captioning and some of our other services for the meetup, as well as Jolly McPhee from Internet Society New York, who is streaming us online today, and Stanley Sakai, who is providing our real-time captioning for the event today. So thank you, all of those people, and looking forward now to handing it over to Chris and learning about New York City parks. Thanks.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes. Thank you, Thomas. And thank you guys for all coming out. My name is Chris Noel. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator with New York City Parks. Part of my role is to work with capital projects, to work with our landscape architects, our designers, our engineers, and our general architects and consultants to design and develop accessible parks that are in new construction, or I should say in design. I also work on the recreation side to develop and help our centers improve our programming for persons with disabilities and seniors. And I also answer all complaints and requests and comments that come through 311. So if you ever have a complaint or request, you can always go, oh, I see many of you have used that already, huh? So you can always go through 311, as we're a city agency, we'll definitely respond back. All right, so as we get started, universal design in New York City parks. It's very interesting, and hopefully this presentation will give you some insight on what our designers and architects do when we're developing a new park or playground. So when it comes to accessible design, the basic meaning could be a design process in which the needs of people with disabilities are specifically considered. Why we think this is somewhat different than universal design is the practice of designing products that can be used by the widest range of people possible. Universal design goes beyond accessible design by upholding the idea that all new environments and products should be usable to everyone regardless of their age, ability, or circumstance, meaning disability. So when you're talking about accessible design, that's almost saying, how do we make this accessible? Whereas with universal design, the kind of thinking is, okay, let's make everything accessible. It's not even a second thought. And that's generally what we do at New York City Parks. We go with the mindset of let's making everything universally accessible so that all people win, no matter what. Quick example, and we were talking about this earlier, most bathrooms that you go into, you see an ADA stall. That's not saying the ADA stall is only for a person with a disability or a wheelchair user, but it's accommodating all. So meaning there have been plenty of times where I've gone into a bathroom and someone has used the ADA stall. I'm not gonna hold that against them. I'm not gonna bang on the door, hey, get out of there, that's not for you, because it's universal design. But people do know that it is for a wheelchair user. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll just kind of roll by so they could kind of see the wheels underneath the door. And generally that's when you hear the flush and the person really starts to say, okay, but the concept is, if you make it so that all can use it, everyone should be able to use it. No questions asked. So as you see with the slide on the left, the ADA provide much needed access, but accessibility solutions may be last minute additions that are unattractive and stigmatizing to users. Meaning that if I am with a bunch of friends and we're trying to go into this building, the red brick building, would my friends necessarily walk with me up the ramp? Or would they take the steps and I take the ramp? So that kind of creates separation. Whereas when you have universal design, if it's all ramped, everyone goes the same direction. And even if you see in this design, I'm sure that, and this is the one to the right, you see the wheelchair accessible symbol saying, okay, this is the accessible way. Meaning that probably on the left of it are steps. But even so, all of our friends and myself, we can all walk together to get to the same place. And that's what universal design accomplishes. So when we come to New York City Parks universal features, You might see a number of these in our parks as we're trying to establish them more, especially with new design and construction. You'll see our amphitheater style seating. So that's basically where we have basketball courts, or it could be a baseball field or what have you. We kind of carved out, well, manufacturers actually, the middle, so that wheelchair users can be right in the middle of it. So if I am with friends, they can sit on either side of me. But before, a lot of bleachers, I would probably, as a wheelchair user, would probably sit on the outsides of it and not be inside. And that creates definitely a separation, whereas we're more so for inclusion. So you're gonna start seeing a lot of our parks and playgrounds where we have amphitheater style seating so that everyone can be included. Even our picnic tables, as you see, it's elongated on one end. So that means a wheelchair user can easily roll up into it and have the table, comfortably on top of the person so you can eat and not necessarily have to sit with the table this way and I'm kind of eating like this because my knees will bump into the table if I'm turned around facing everyone else. Another form of inclusion. Benches with arms and backrests, that's important for seniors, for someone who's getting up. So you might have a backless bench, or you might have a lot of benches that you've seen where it's just a seat in the back, but to make it comfortable, more easier for a person with a disability or a senior to get up from the bench, we try to make sure that 50% of our benches have armrests and backs, just in case someone does need that accommodation. Our tables as well, you see a number of them in our parks where people play cards or you could play chess or checkers on them. There's a carved out section for a wheelchair user to go in there and be able to sit with friends and play. And our companion seating, the two bottom to the right, as you see, we'll have one at the end of a bench. And you'll see this one right here, a young lady with her son. They're included in between. So for many of the parks, I would say of yesteryear, we might have a line of benches all right next to each other. And there's no space for a wheelchair user to sit within everyone else. So basically, if this is a bench and you're all facing me, I would have to sit this way if I'm talking to my friends, versus sitting alongside them and letting the pathway open up for everyone to travel. So we try to include this in all of our new construction, just so that people with disabilities feel included. But let's not forget about mothers with baby strollers. When you have the companion seating, it's easy to put a baby stroller right next to you. Or if you're traveling and might have a shopping cart, it saves it from being in the pathway, but more so next to you. So when we talk about universal accessibility, it's not just the person with the wheelchair who benefits, it's everyone. With our signage that you'll start seeing on a lot of our parks, we're lowering it so that persons with disabilities or people that don't like to strain their neck looking up at the signage to see the park hours and the rules of the park. A lot of our older signage was very high, so you couldn't really read the words. So we're lowering it now, and we tried to put it to the ADA standard so that everyone can read it, especially myself, or maybe someone that uses a walker or a senior who uses a cane and can't really look up. They'll be able to now see the park hours and all of the rules and regulations. And a lot of time we'll have pathway indicators on the floor. So it's kind of like a design, but it's almost saying, hey, this is the accessible pathway. So versus having a big glaring sign with the universal design symbol on it for accessibility, we have something like this that might be on one of our pavers on the pathway. So it's kind of inconspicuously saying, hey, this is the accessible way, where it doesn't really just shout out at you, And obviously we have a number of truncated domes at all of our curb cuts. We try to make them high visibility so that persons with vision loss can be able to see it even when the sun starts going down and it gets darker. The main thing is having contrast between the truncated domes and the sidewalk so that a person can definitely see where they're going and where the curb cut is so that they don't walk into the curb. This is another new design that a lot of manufacturers are coming out with, and you'll start seeing this in a number of our parks if you haven't seen it already. This is our new water fountains, whereas you have one that's accessible for a wheelchair user, and you also have one where if a person doesn't necessarily like to bend down or can't bend down as much, we have one on the other side. So before you used to maybe see the box little water fountains that you would have to bend all the way down for. and they weren't accessible at all. This actually accomplishes both. So for people that don't like bending down too much, we raise it a little bit. And we also have the other one, as you see on the left here, for wheelchair users to now use water fountains in their wheelchair without having to turn to the side or, just to get a drink of water. So you start seeing a lot of these in our new playgrounds that are coming out within the next few years. And to make it even better, we're putting a lot more water bottle fillers. So for a lot of persons that might be jogging through our parks, or that might be riding a bike and want to stop and get some water and fill up their water bottle, you're going to start seeing a lot more of these where they're all accessible. As you see, we have one that's just a bottle filler, one with both of the water fountains on the side of it and the water bottle filler, and even one here that you'll see in a lot of our dog runs with a little doggy bowl on the side, so that dogs can now get water in a lot of our parks and dog runs, which is pretty cool. So as you see, it's our type E high-low fountain and our type F. One is more modern, and we kind of like all types of water fountains that are accessible, because now everyone has access to it, whereas before they really didn't. When it comes to bathrooms, and this is great because it'll show you these are accessible bathrooms, but what we're also doing is a lot of our bathrooms had one water fountain on the side of it, which generally weren't accessible. Now with our comfort stations, we're able to have the water running year round versus the outdoor ones where it's not connected to a comfort station. We generally shut down during the winter seasons because we don't want the pipes to freeze if we do keep it on year round. Whereas if it's housed within the comfort stations, we can keep these water fountains running year round. But what we're doing is we're putting the same, as you saw the type E and the type F water fountains, we're still putting the two heights now on our comfort stations, so that if you don't like to bend down as much, or if you need an accessible wheelchair usable fountain, you'll start seeing more of those now. And it's great for us because, as I mentioned, it's helping the public, general public, whether you're disabled or not, be able to access a number of our amenities. And as you see here, as we talked about topography earlier on before the presentation started, this is close to Inwood Hills Park, as we had spoken about earlier, whereas we have huge grade change. But what we've done is we did a switchback ramp to basically make it navigable for a person with a disability or anyone who definitely wants to walk and not have to go down a tremendous slope. So as you see with this design, we've done it at an 8.33% slope, which is the max slope that we can have to make it accessible, obviously with handrails, but it's a lot more accessible than it was previously. So before, I would have never been able to get to La Marina, which is over here, or Inwood Hill Park, starting from over here. Now I'm able to. I would have probably had to go to Dyckman Street and travel all the way up Dyckman Street. But as you see with the plantings inside of it, we not only make it accessible, but we make it enjoyable for you to enjoy some green space while you're traveling. And that's important as well. We are parks and recreation, but the parks should mean green and not as much asphalt and cement. So we definitely try to include as much green space as possible with plantings. Morningside Playground Park, Playground 123 is a great example of how we use the topography to make sure that we had ramping throughout and that you're able to travel and peruse the whole park without having to worry about steps. It's in 3 phases, and we've done 2 so far. We're going on to the 3rd now, which is in construction. And hopefully when it opens, a lot more children with disabilities will visit this park. As we try to make sure that all of our parks and playgrounds are universally accessible, one by one, it's great when we see a number of children with disabilities, various disabilities playing in them, because that makes our designers happy, because that's like mission accomplished. And we didn't even get to the play equipment yet. Our play equipment manufacturers work with us so that we're able to have accessible play equipment in our playgrounds, whereas before, you go to a lot of our older playgrounds, it's hard to find any accessible play equipment for a child with a disability. So what does that mean? The child with a disability goes to the playground and there's nothing that they can play with, nothing that they can really do to enjoy it, especially if they have friends who are non-disabled. Remember what we talked about universal accessibility, that inclusion factor is basically null and void at that playground, and the child with a disability is left out. Another form of accessibility that we're doing are handrails. So with a number of parks where we do have huge elevations, we try to make sure that we have handrails that are for persons that might be ambulatory but still might not have enough balance, such as a senior who still wants to travel the route up the steps to maybe get a greater view. But if there's no handrails, that person might not feel as comfortable traveling up that flight of steps. So we've done a number of modifications where we've added handrails to make sure that it's an easier and safer trip. So when it comes to surfacing, these are the 3 levels that we have. Accessible surfacing, obviously with asphalt, concrete, our pavers, our safety surface that's in our playgrounds, and ADA granite block, which you'll see a lot in our playgrounds, such as Central Park, in terms of large parks. And we have semi-accessible. They can be accessible if they're maintained. But normally if they're not maintained, they wouldn't be accessible, such as our stone screenings, wood chips, natural turf, synthetic turf. When it comes to the stone screenings and the wood chips, if it's compacted on a, say, daily basis or more frequently than not, it's very accessible for a wheelchair user or someone with a walker per se. But if it's not, and say it rains and it's not compacted or it's not leveled out, it can be very inaccessible and you'll basically get stuck in the middle of wood chips and have to ask for help to get out. So we try to make sure that when we are putting stone screenings or wood chips in a playground or a design, that the thought is it's going to be maintained. Obviously, sand is inaccessible, but we'll show you how we've kind of made it accessible on our beaches, especially with the pool season and the beach season coming up. So when we talk about beaches and boardwalks, we have beach mats that we use. So as we have designated sections on each beach, whereas we can grade it so that it's pretty level and flat, and then obviously compact it and then lay the mats on top of it. As you see here with the gentleman who had the position before me, our new and current commissioner for the Mayor's Office for Persons with Disabilities, Victor Calisi, leading the group, with our former Mayor's Office for Persons with Disabilities, Matthew Sapelin, who passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, on our beach. And as you see, you have a wheelchair user, you have a person with a vision loss with his guide dog, and they're all able to travel, and persons obviously who are ambulatory. But as we mentioned before, everyone's able to travel together to get to a point on a beach. And that's what we consider a success, to allow persons with disabilities and without to be able to travel on the same pathway and enjoy the beaches. And you'll see a lot of our comfort stations that we have on Rockaway Beach and Coney Island and Manhattan Beach. These were recently installed, I should say, and you might see a lot of them on those beaches, as I mentioned. They came from the Hurricane Sandy monies, where Hurricane Sandy pretty much destroyed a number of our beaches. But with the monies from FEMA and governmental sources, we're able to obviously design something new, but if we're designing it new, we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. So our comfort stations, as you see here, with the switchback ramp, even though they're elevated, in case there is another storm, the water will run underneath it now. But we still, with that grade change, wanted to make it as accessible as possible for everyone's use. So when it comes to buildings and historic sites, landmark buildings, I should say, we go to the picture before. So this is one of the slides that we had in the beginning where you're almost making a ramp next to steps to make it accessible. But as you see, and this is the Morris Jamel Mansion in Upper Manhattan in Harlem, we pretty much took out so much land that was here prior, and I guess the key point is looking at that tree in the middle. We took out a huge swath of land right here to basically make it a universally designed entrance. So now instead of having a ramp, it's easy to construct a cement ramp right here and make it at 8.3%, maybe put some handrails on it and keep the steps. But what purpose would that serve? You would still separate a person with a disability versus an ambulatory person. Whereas now, everyone can walk and enjoy the entrance together without any separation. So as you see with the before and after pictures, how much a difference makes when you do it universally. When we come to ball fields, Here's an example of our J.J. Walker ball field in downtown Manhattan, where we want to make sure that if you're a coach of a baseball or softball team and you're a wheelchair user, that would really suck if you can't make it to the dugout. You know, you're on the outside fence telling your team, hey, round third, come home, versus being right in the dugout. Obviously common sense to everyone in this room, but not a lot of our playgrounds, or I should say ball fields, were as accessible as they are now. So our designers, and I give a lot of respect to our designers, because when they're designing, unless they have had a person, say, with a disability in their family or that they know, you can almost say, well, how are they going to know about accessibility? We have a great group of landscape architects and designers at New York City Parks, and I give them a lot of credit. Sure, I'm there to cheer them on and say, hey, you know, could we do this, could we do that? But they really lead the charge in designing some very eloquent and universally accessible playground, parks, ball fields. I can't give enough credit to them because it starts with the design. So as you see here, even with the pathways, we try to make sure that there's a pathway from, I guess, the main thoroughfare to the dugouts. So what we're doing in all new construction for our ball fields is making sure that both dugouts, if the topography and the grade allows for it, we try to make sure that both dugouts are fully accessible, so that if you are a coach and you have a disability, doesn't matter on which bench you're on, you'll be able to coach your team. Dog runs. Our dog runs are great because now we're making them more accessible than ever. So as you see with the padding and the accessible surfacing next to the benches, now if you're a wheelchair user or use a cane or walker, you're able, or if it's a mother with a baby stroller and she's traveling to the dog run to let their dog get exercise and play with other dogs, you're now able to very comfortably, as you see here. And this is with a number of our dog runs. We're getting a lot of requests for more dog runs in neighborhoods as people are getting more dogs. So we definitely want to make sure that when we are designing them, not just because it's the law to make it accessible, but because we kind of feel it has to be accessible regardless of the law. And we try to go over and beyond accessibility if we can. We don't just stick to the basics. Our outdoor gyms. So, and I guess as a plug for our recreation centers, for persons with disabilities, our recreation center membership is $25 for the year. All you would need to do is show certain forms of identification. And for persons with disability, you can go to any of our recreation centers for $25. But even still, if you're not disabled, it's $150 for the year. And you can go to any of our recreation centers in the city, which is still a great deal. You know, I've seen some prices of some gyms. I'm just saying, our parks, our recreation centers have the same equipment, and it's, you know, it's here for all New Yorkers as we're a city agency. So I would definitely suggest you go to your local recreation center and take a look around. Because remember, that price of membership, you can go to any of them in any of the 5 boroughs. So you might be in another borough, visiting some friends or family and say, hey, there's a recreation center right around the corner. Let me go swim. Let me go get a workout. Let me get on the treadmill. Let me get on the exercise bike. Let me go lift some weights. You have access to all of our recreation centers, so it's a great deal. But for a lot of persons, you might want to go to the park and work out outside. So we're developing a number of accessible workout equipment, pieces of workout equipment. As you see here on the left, something we've worked with a lot of our manufacturers to design are the triple parallel bars. So in a number of parks, you'll see parallel bars, just 2 of them. But the idea of having a 3rd bar, we brought to designers and said, hey, what about if a person's just getting out of therapy, they're done with their inpatient stay, they're done with their outpatient stay, how do they still continue to learn how to walk? Why not give them that opportunity in our parks and playgrounds? So that's what we've developed with a number of our manufacturers that we use that develop the equipment. And it's been working out great because, as we mentioned, with universal accessibility, if a wheelchair user or someone with a walker wants to use the lowered parallel bars, they can. But I've gone to a number of parks and playgrounds where I've seen it, and because it's lowered, you have persons without disabilities using it to do push-ups, you know, using it to do pull-ups. Everyone uses it. No one loses when it's universal accessibility, including this piece, as you see with the officer right here. that's a dipping station that can be used for a person with a disability if they're facing it to do dips upward. And as you see right there, there's a shoulder press right next to them that's accessible, as well as a chest press. So with these 3 pieces in a row, all 3 of those pieces are accessible. And we're putting them in our playground. And we have one manufacturer who has this piece right here, where it's a chest press, where you can go on either side. Obviously, if you want to transfer to the seated side, you can. If you're a wheelchair user and don't want to leave your wheelchair, you can go to the side without the seat and use it as a chest press. But as I mentioned before, with universal accessibility, there have been a number of times where I've gone to our parks and I've seen persons using the chest press in a crouch position, you know, because they're getting more of a workout. You're getting your quads worked out. You're working your back muscles. So versus just sitting and doing the chest press, you're actually working more muscles without using the bench. And you don't have to be disabled to use it. You know, New York has come up with the, you know, we can make anything work for us. So I've seen that in a number of playgrounds, and it made me say, wow, that's pretty cool, you know. You're getting more for your workout. And these are obviously free units in all of our parks. So we definitely encourage you, and they're being developed a lot more. They're being requested by the public to go out and try them out. Give us your opinion on them. You can always go to our website and email me directly, or you could call 311 and say how great the playground adaptive workout equipment is, and we need more of it in our park. Why not? Community gardens are important. As we mentioned, New York City, you see tons of buildings, asphalt, concrete. Green space is very important, especially in communities where you can teach children how to garden. This is a Clinkscales playground in Harlem, whereas as you see with the planting beds, we have different levels. So we have ones where persons without or with disabilities can get down and really plant, or we have the ones that are elevated where a person maybe sitting in a wheelchair walker can almost reach over and plant. So this allows everyone to kind of get in the mood of planting. And granted, this was at the opening, but now if you go past here, it's full of green. And they wanted this. They actually requested this for this playground. The gentleman, Robert Clinkscales. This playground was just an alleyway, used to have tons of bad things going on in here. And he said he wanted to clean it up and he wanted to make it green. And we tried to help him as best we can to accomplish his goals. And it actually worked out. It's still being used by the community, and the community actually takes it and makes sure they're there for the upkeep so that it doesn't go away or become something that's not intended for what it was designed and built for. Now, as we talk about our playgrounds, as you see, we have multi-level playgrounds here, but with the play equipment, you're able to access all of it. So as you see for each of the slides, there's a way for a person with limited mobility to get to each level and play with other children. And as I mentioned, I can't give enough credit to our designers, because when they work with our equipment manufacturers, and obviously it's part of the design, to where to place the equipment and where it will work, it's all about inclusion. So I mean, if a group of children come and some are disabled, some are not, it allows all children to play all in the same play space. And that's a great thing because no one feels left out. But if a child with a disability isn't there, tons of kids can run around and you still have the same play space. But in a situation, if there is a child with a disability, they won't be excluded. So similar when we talked about the bathroom and the ADA stalls, it's almost the same concept. It's there if you need it. You know, that's guaranteed. If not, sure, it's there for everyone's use, but no one will be left out. And that's the key. That's what we do at New York City Parks to make sure everyone's included. So as you see here, where there's not space allowed for full ramping, we have partial ramping on the left, and then we have full ramping on the right. So you see Indian Road Playground. This is in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and Laurelton West is in Queens. And this was a great playground. When Imelda designed this, she basically wanted to make sure that wheelchair users were able to go across this huge ramp here, because it's right next to the Cross Island Parkway. So she kind of wanted to keep it in that mindset of almost like being on a highway per se. So that's where the concept came from, to kind of have that elevated ramp where when you're up there, you can kind of see over everything. So for a child in a wheelchair with limited mobility, it gives them access to view that. Whereas in playgrounds of the past, we didn't have that option to give to children with or without disability. And it's a pretty cool playground. And as you see here, everyone loves swings. Universal accessibility. We call it a roller coaster harness, but for the most part, it allows a child with a disability that doesn't have great trunk control to kind of stay positioned in their swing seat. Now, before we had bucket swings and strap swings, basically, none of them were accessible. But with this one, a child with or without a disability can use it and still have fun. But safety is the key. So we try to make sure we have at least one of them in each of our swing bays in our playgrounds, so that if a child with a disability needs to use it, they can. In some cases, we have to put the universal ADA symbol inside of it, because we've had situations where parents have come with a child with a disability, and the kids loved it so much that weren't disabled. It was tough to tell a child to, okay, you need to come off the swing, So I think to make it easier for parents, we kind of started putting that symbol in there to kind of almost saying, it's almost like the bus. When you ride a bus, it says if a senior or someone comes on, if you could please give up this seat, exactly. So that's kind of our way of saying, if a parent that comes with a child with a disability, needs to use this swing, if you can accommodate that. So, but it was tough. I've heard some situations where it was tough to get a child off of that swing. They love it. And as you see here, it's for full use for everyone. This was an older model ADA swing that was made for children that had various levels of disability, but obviously no trunk control, so they needed to be in a seated position so that they can enjoy the swing area. We still have some of those, but now we do them upon request. The reason being is that because it's almost flat, we had instances of children, we'd have 3 or 4 children just pile up on it on a row. And what happens when you have that much weight on it? It pops. And then we're without an ADA swing, and then we'll get a call and say, hey, your ADA swing is broken. And we realized that this swing was breaking a lot. So our manufacturers came up, as I mentioned, the ones with the roller coaster harness, so that it's harder to break, but it still keeps the child safe. But if there is a parent or a community member who has a playground or park and they like to request this swing for their neighbor or their child, we can put them in a playground upon request. But for the most part, we go with the durable ones, and parents with disabilities love it as well. So it works out well for everyone. And we do try to accommodate each community if they do have a specific request. Because remember, the playground is an extension of the community. That's where community can go and sit and, just enjoy the scenery, enjoy just being in a space where their children can play. So we try to make it as accommodable for them upon request. A number of parks also have sensory play. So for children, say with autism or developmentally delayed, there are a number of items that we have in our parks where they can actually still experience it. We have sound gardens, we have sensory gardens, we have gardens with plantings that have plants with specific smells. We have talk tubes so that children can talk to other children in other parts of the playground. So as you see, we try to make sure that all children are accommodated. Here's some more ground level play features that we use for children. Obviously you look through those and there are different designs that you'll see. If a child has have cars or what have you, they can play on this, and they're accessible for a child in a wheelchair to use or without. Here's some more examples of our ground level play features. Even here we have our elevated sand table. So if a child can't get into the sandbox, we bring the sandbox to them. So as you see right here on the bottom right, that elevated sand table is filled with sand. So if they want to build a sand castle, if they want to play with the sand without getting into the sandbox, they obviously can. And we also have bars there. So if the child needs to use them to get safely into the sandbox with assistance, they can. So those handrails definitely come in important in terms of safety, overall safety. And here's some more examples. playhouses are great. They allow for accessibility. We try to make sure we get the ones with the doorways wide enough so that children with all levels of abilities can play in each of them. And as you see, it's all about the experience for children going to the playground and being included with others and not being shut out. So when we do a basic run through of our parks, and I've been doing a lot of it, we usually have this checklist. It's our universal design features for playgrounds. So as you see with this checklist, these are all the levels of universal accessibility that could possibly fit in a playground. And this, for example, is playground 1, 2, 3. So that's, as we mentioned before, that's in Morningside Park in Upper Manhattan. And other than the elevated sand table and the comfort station, which we're looking to hopefully get in phase 3 to make it more accessible than it currently is, it's checked off completely. Our chief of design, Nancy Prince, and one of our landscape architects, Tristan Porto, designed this park. And they designed it to make it fully accessible for all children to use. I think they did a great job. When it comes to a number of playgrounds that you're going to see, I'd say within the next few years, even few months, the mayor's given us a tremendous amount of money to develop our parks and playgrounds with our community parks initiative, our anchor parks, and basically what that's doing is we're getting a lot more money allocated to playgrounds to make these accessible features happen. Obviously with the monies from the local elected officials, such as your local councilman and a lot of state electeds, combined with those monies that the mayor has given us, we've been able to do some great things with playgrounds you haven't even seen yet. I've seen them, but you guys haven't seen them yet. So I guarantee you, when you see them within the next few years, you're going to be amazed. You're going to be like, I remember Chris Noel said that these parks were going to be like, it's almost going to be like going to an amusement park. That's how great they're going to be in terms of the play equipment we're using, how accessible and spaced out they are, and even how much green space we're adding. We have a unit called the Green Infrastructure Group, and we try to make sure that we develop different forms of greenery where, whether it's to prevent it from flooding, or just to have an area where persons with or without disabilities can walk through and see a number of plantings and trees. And it's a great thing to go through a park. I also have to thank, I'd say, our Commissioner of Parks, Mitchell Silver, as well as our Deputy Commissioner of Capital Projects, Therese Braddock, because they're the ones who really lead the charge to say, hey, this is how our parks need to be designed, and they need to be designed ASAP so that we can get them out to the public sooner than later. And I definitely appreciate everything they do. But also on the recreation side, we try to make sure that our recreation centers aren't left behind. So there's a number of dollars put to make sure that our recreation centers are just as accessible. And obviously with our commissioners, Adina Long, as well as Emily Chase, they've definitely led the charge to make sure that our recreation centers are up and running with programming and that they're as accessible as can be. But with that said, I think a pretty unique program that we have going on. As I mentioned, we have a number of parks through the Community Parks Initiative, but what we're doing is we're saying, okay, the mayor said, let's designate monies to these parks that haven't been touched in, say, 20, 25 years. Let's go for the parks that are the oldest and haven't been redone in a long time. And I appreciate his efforts for that as well as our Commissioner Silver, who goes along with it. So what we're doing is we have the Community Parks Initiative summer program, our summer sports experience. So these playgrounds that weren't touched in a number of years, we actually have programming going on to bring kids into these parks and playgrounds. Many of them were desolate because they said, the play equipment, I'm not gonna go here, I'm gonna go to this playground. So what we're trying to do is bring kids back into these playgrounds that are eventually gonna be completely redone. So that way when they are redone, they'll see kind of what New York City Parks has done to make their neighborhood more friendlier, especially with our Parks Without Borders, where we are lowering the fences in our playgrounds to make it more welcoming, making more welcoming and obviously accessible entrances. We want our playgrounds to be a staple for the community so that it goes back to how it used to be. Everyone can come to the playground and have fun, and it'd be a safe environment for everyone. And because of the level of decor that's going into them, we're also hoping that the people in the community have the upkeep of them so that they're not throwing bottles on the asphalt and breaking the play equipment at night when the lights go out. but more so having respect and saying, wow, look at this playground that's in our community now. Let's have respect for it. And I think that teaches the kids a lot. So with all of our units that we have in parks kind of working together to make our play experiences better in our parks, playgrounds, and recreation centers, I encourage you all to check them out when you get a chance. It's a great thing. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'm sure you have tons of questions. I saw a lot of note taking, so I'm sure you have tons of questions you'd like to ask, and I think, sure, let's go ahead for it. Don't be shy now, guys. Yep, we have a question in the back. Perfect.
Did you do any prototyping or testing before you actually built out these plans?
For the most part, I would say it would come down to our landscape architects and our designers. That's what they went to school for, and they've worked on a number of projects, as well as our consultants. So for the prototypes, I would say in terms of the play equipment, we leave that to the play equipment manufacturers. They do a number of testing and a number of where they bring these pieces of play equipment to a community to see how the kids interact and play on it, etc. So with the play equipment, I would definitely say it goes through a number of testing and different versions and models. But in terms of prototyping, every playground and park has its own unique characteristics and features. That comes down to the scope meetings. Before we even start the design of a playground or a park, we go to the community to say, hey, what do you guys think? What do you want in your park? What do you want in your playground? And sometimes we make it easier for them and say, okay, here are the categories. What would you like to add to it? This is what we were thinking of having in this playground. What would you keep? What would you not like to see? Because remember, the playgrounds are an extension of the community. So if the community is able to have some input in their community playground, I think it's great. And it makes them more appreciative of it once it is designed and constructed, because they can say, hey, I had a piece of designing that playground, and it's a new playground in our community versus one that was just sitting there for so many years and needed some attention. So as I say, once again, I think Mayor de Blasio did a great job in terms of allocating money so that these playgrounds can, basically be, what's the word I'm looking for? Dynamic, and along with our Commissioner Silver, who's leading the charge, and obviously our Commissioner Braddock, who also makes sure to keep the troops in line so that we finish these playgrounds in a timely fashion. Yep.
So that kind of leads into a question I had, which was how much does the city of New York collaborate with other cities in designing both the parks and the equipment?
Well, I would say for a number of our landscape architects and designers, they've come from different cities where they were working in park systems. Sometimes we do reach out to other, I'd say, states and cities to kind of say, hey, well, look what they've done here. But I can almost guarantee you, and I guess it's going to be documented, so I will honestly say this: you can pretty much go to any city or state in the United States, and you're not going to find a more comprehensive group of accessible playgrounds that we have here in New York City. And that's because I've traveled to other states and cities for conferences and different events, and a lot of times I'll say I'll go to that city or state and have a rental car, so I'll go, let me see what their parks are looking like. Let me see how accessible they are. And without calling out those states or cities, because this, because this could be, it's not New York City, this could be worldwide, basically, whoever's viewing this YouTube live stream, but they're not as accessible as I thought it would be. You might have one designated playground or a few, or a number of them. But when you think of New York City and how big we are and how many playgrounds we have, how many acres of land we have that we use for our parks and playgrounds, and as accessible as we are, I'd like to see a city or state that would compare with us. And once again, I would have to thank Mayor Bloomberg, who initially started it, with coming up with putting dollars in developing conservancy groups, along with former Commissioner Benepi, former Commissioner White, and now with Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Silver. I think we're doing a great job in terms of making our parks and playgrounds more accessible than they were in the past. So like I said before, I would challenge any city or state to say they have a more comprehensive group of accessible playgrounds than we do. And that's not just bragging or boasting. Like I said, I'm not a designer, I leave that to the guys at our capital projects who are at the Olmsted Center and designing parks and playgrounds every day and just waiting for the day it's finished, the construction is finished. You know, and I see it in their eyes as well. And I see the designs, and I don't show them how happy I am because I want them to still make them as accessible as possible. But we have some very dynamic playgrounds that are going to be ribbon cut, opened in the next few months, years. And I think you guys are going to all appreciate it.
So I'm just really following up the same question, because that was my question too. Are you saying that we are setting the standard, or are you saying we're on the cutting edge? There's a difference.
Sure. I would say both. Because we are setting the standard, because I'm sure a lot of other cities and park departments and agencies in other states are looking at us and saying, you know, look at what New York City Park is doing, because we're so huge, we're so large, and we're New York City. Everyone likes what we do and does what we do. So that's where I say we also are cutting edge, because I think when we're working with our playground equipment manufacturers, we're working on them with pieces of equipment that they haven't developed yet. So meaning if they're developing pieces of play equipment with our input, they're obviously able to sell it to all other park groups.
That's what I want to ask.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to brag or boast, you know.
No, that's the question.
Yeah.
So we're actually sort of the testing ground for some of these ideas.
Yeah, as he mentioned with the prototype, sure, but we're actually the prototype. We're actually saying, okay, let's develop this piece of play equipment. As I mentioned, with a lot of the adult fitness, we worked with our playground equipment manufacturers to develop it. And obviously they can use it and sell it all across the world, but it starts here in New York City, you know. And as I say, I think our Commissioner Silver and our Capital Projects Commissioner Therese Braddock for allowing our architects and our designers to work with the playground manufacturers and to say, hey, let's develop something that we can actually pay for. And we thank our Mayor de Blasio for that, and our elected officials locally, the council persons who put in obviously millions of dollars into each playground and park. They're not cheap, you know, but you need money to kind of be cutting edge and to kind of lead the charge. So yeah, I would say both. You know.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure,
to that?
please.
It's really more what concerns me. Capital projects are great, right? And you mentioned a lot of names, and we all see the newspaper and getting a lot of credit.
Yes.
So about this maintenance question.
Yes.
So you mentioned about, like, maybe we can get the community to have a sense of ownership, they don't tear the place apart.
Which is important.
That's
yes.
very important.
Yes.
And I'm on board. But I wonder about the budget that your department has for maintaining all this stuff.
Sure.
You know,
Well,
I mean, like, that seems, because that's not as glamorous.
No, it's not. Cleanup of parks is never a glamorous job, but we have a number of volunteers. We have a number of programs that we have where we bring out persons. At one point, it was recipients for persons that have welfare and wanted to work again for the summer seasonally. And they said, hey, I wouldn't mind working in a park. There are a number of those workers that were happy to work and clean the parks every day. We actually have them stationed at our comfort stations to make sure the comfort stations stay clean, make sure someone's able to sweep. But you know what? They kind of, as we talked about before, the community, they felt an ownership to that park because they said, hey, I'm here making sure this park stays clean. Now, obviously, with our operations departments, every borough has an operations department, which are very well and keep our city running, as well as our citywide services. But we have a number of, obviously, pieces of equipment that are used to help the workers clean up the parks more effectively, to help keep our green space green, and that comes down to our forestry department big time. But I think in parks, we have a many well-running units that kind of say, hey, you take care of this, I take care of this. You guys design parks, we can find a way to clean the parks. As I mentioned, you can't go to a park in New York City and say, oh, this park is so disgusting.
No.
You can't.
No.
And think about how, not anymore, exactly. So that's why I did mention a number of names who you might see in the press sometimes, and it's not always getting a favorable response because a lot of time reporters don't see what goes on behind the scenes and how hard it is to make it happen. A lot of times you think it's easy to maintain these parks and playgrounds, but as I mentioned before, we have so many acres of it. Imagine all these little playgrounds in every borough. But we have our operations, and I give our chief of operations tons of credit because obviously they're putting their crews in situations so that this can all get done. And I thank you for asking that question because I think that needs to be reported. How clean New York City parks are. You figure in a city as big as New York. Now granted, obviously some might miss the cut, but not many. Not many, and I've seen a number of playgrounds. I go to a number of playgrounds when I obviously do ADA inspections, as I mentioned before, or just to check out new design or new construction or see if people are using play equipment that for a recently opened park or playground. And sometimes I'm amazed just how clean they are. And a lot of times if you go to your local park and you go out there 7, 8 in the morning, you'll see a park worker out there cleaning up, making sure the comfort station is clean. You know, that's not an easy job to go in and clean the bathrooms, you know? But you know, it's like I said, everyone has a job to do. And as long as you're part of the system and you see how your small piece helps the bigger picture, I think that's the main thing why people say, hey, I want to keep this bathroom spotless. Even though it's for public use, we don't charge you for going into our bathrooms. You don't even have to necessarily be with a child in that playground to use the bathroom. You can't be in the playground as an adult without a child, but to use the bathroom, sure. It's a free bathroom to use, and we keep them clean as best we can. And it's not easy. New York City is a big place. So, you know, a taxi driver might drive and say, I gotta use the bathroom. Let me go to this park or playground and use that bathroom. By all right, they're a New Yorker. This is city land. They're able to do it. But imagine for the workers who we have cleaning those bathrooms to make sure that the urinals and the stalls are cleaned. It's not easy, but it gets done. So, like I said, we have many agencies within New York City that help make New York City a great place. But I like the agency that I'm with, and I'll definitely stand behind everything we do because we make New York City greener, we make it fun, we allow a place for kids to go play and grow up together in a nice, safe environment. So I think that's pretty cool. Yep, got Thomas?
Yeah, question just related to like the triple parallel bars
Yep.
and or the
Something that was created in New York City with New York City Parks.
Yeah, so that and the roller coaster harness are those.
Yes,
I mean, I'm much more familiar with like technical standards, but
Sure.
would those be things that you could say they don't follow like an ADA guideline or they don't follow specific guidelines, so you can
Sure.
mandate it, or is that more
Exactly.
of a design or prototype?
Well, it's kind of both. A lot of them haven't gotten up to the ADA standards, meaning for parallel bars specifically. So what we did actually was we went to a number of rehab institutions in New York City, Mount Sinai Hospital and NYU Rusk. And we went to the therapist and said, you know, and obviously myself as a person with a disability, sure, everyone uses the parallel bars for some sort of exercise or rehabilitation. And we asked them the appropriate height for persons with disabilities to use. And we came up with that number as a consensus. And it works well because we've actually heard from some rehab groups who take their patients out to the playground that was near them where we had them constructed and actually used it. The reason they went outside of their rehab model into our playground to use the triple parallel bar, they wanted to integrate this person who's newly disabled back into the community. And that's kind of what we're thinking too. Like after your rehab is done, after your insurance isn't paying for it anymore, how do you still continue with that therapy without paying out of pocket? So in a sense, they kind of helped us out by testing it. So as we talked about before, as a prototype, this is something that's brand new. And they actually brought their patients out to try it out and use it, just to get them familiar with going into a playground and not feeling odd because you're newly disabled and you might not be used to being disabled and in public. So it actually helps them out, you know, so they actually help us by helping themselves and then helping the patient, obviously. So yeah, so we do try to obviously comply by all of the standards, but when you're coming up with, and obviously the US Access Board looks at everything, even new design, and they say, hey, well, you know, we need to put a standard to this so that, you know, it's safe and it's accessible so that everyone can use it. So we're trying to raise the bar with a number of things that we do. Even when you look at the adult fitness equipment, if I go back to that screen, it's pretty cool that we can actually have this out there. I mean, what other city or state that you can go to and see accessible fitness equipment? It starts here in New York City. You know, and I'm proud to say that as a born and bred New Yorker.
So you're saying cutting edge.
Cutting
You're
edge.
saying we're not going to move some of the town and still have this equipment for us to enjoy right now, as far as you know.
That we're going to move to, that another
Like,
town.
you're gonna go, yeah, I'm going to move to some other city, wonderful city in our nation, and I'm going to find
And there are
my
many.
exercise station in my neighborhood. Like I have one of these in my neighborhood.
Yeah, which neighborhood do you live in?
Brooklyn Bridge Park, the pier.
Yes. Oh, Brooklyn Bridge Park. Yeah, we have tons of them. And yeah, I would say yeah, we're cutting edge because other cities might look at this and say, hey, how can we get this in our parks and our playgrounds? You know. But as you said, have you used a piece of it yet? You tried it out?
My wife does one. You know.
We have elliptical machines. It's free. You could go out there early in the morning. You know, get some fresh air and work out outdoors. It's great. And like I said, a lot of these pieces were recently developed. So we are pretty much the prototype, as we mentioned. So we're not following another prototype. We're basically creating one here in New York City. And it comes with the use of it. Now, granted, you know, and what's also great about it, too, is you have the codes on the side. So if you go there with your smartphone or whatever, and it gives you directions on how to use the equipment, whether you're disabled or not. So if any of you go to your local playgrounds and parks and you see adult fitness equipment, you'll see the QR code, and you go with your smartphone and it'll show you video of how to use it if you're disabled or not. The reason that being is because, as we mentioned with universal accessibility, this one obviously says, okay, wheelchair user can use it. The pieces from this manufacturer, you would almost, if you go up to it, it's accessible, but you would say, how do I use it? So, for a good example, oh, that's right, I can't go too far, right? I forgot, I thought it was wireless for a second. So this one right here, you can see the officer doing dips, but for a wheelchair user, they would go forward and be able to do dips. This right here is almost we call it, it would be a shoulder press, but really it's for squatting. So a person without a disability, those pieces would go right here on their shoulders. So it's actually a squat press to get your legs stronger. But if you're a wheelchair user, you can go in towards it and use it as a shoulder press. Same thing with the chest press. Obviously, you would need to transfer into it, as I've done many of times with that equipment manufacturer, to make sure that it's accessible enough. We would almost call that semi-accessible because obviously you would have to ambulate and leave your wheelchair or your mobility device. But what's specific about that chest press machine right there that this equipment manufacturer did, you can actually adjust the tension with a knob. So if you want to have a light workout, if you want to have a more strenuous workout, you can actually change the pressure settings on that, which is pretty cool, as well as this the shoulder press as well. So what I'm saying is these pieces of equipment, sure, we're using them in a lot of our playgrounds and parks. I would challenge you to see another playground or park system that uses them as well as New York City Parks has so far. And even with this equipment manufacturer here, I think it's great to have a combination of different pieces. So we don't necessarily want to use one playground equipment manufacturer's pieces in all of our parks because then there's no variety. So we definitely have our other manufacturers and we work with them to develop these pieces of equipment, obviously to make them universally accessible, so that you might be in Brooklyn Bridge Park and see one set of adult fitness equipment. You might go to Prospect Park Playground and see another piece of fitness equipment. So you can kind of get different workouts by going to different parks and playgrounds. And obviously that comes down to our designers who are saying, hey, these are the pieces we can put here to make sure it fits, make sure there's a 5-foot area for turning radius for wheelchair users to use. There's a level of universal accessible thinking automatically. So as we mentioned before, when you have accessible design and universal design, accessible design is almost saying, well, how can we make it accessible? Whereas universal design is, let's make it accessible, fully accessible off the bat. It's not even a how, it's a we're going to. And that's the mindset that we have at New York City Parks. Not how, but we're going to do it. And we've done it successfully in a number of places. And you're gonna see more as the parks continuously are gonna be opened with the Mayor's Community Parks Initiative monies. I think you guys will see, like, wow, like Chris wasn't lying, you know? he was really on point about that. Yep. Any other questions?
So
Yes.
Chris, currently, what percentage of park spaces and playgrounds are universally accessible?
To give you an honest number, a lot of them aren't constructed yet. But I would say the number was probably very low. And that comes down to a number of reasons. Comes down to money a lot of times. The parks, and obviously a lot of features that go on in our neighborhood are funded by local assemblyman, a councilman or woman, council person, I should say. But you know, if they're putting $1 million to a playground, $2 million, $3 million, obviously when you figure out the construction costs and what you're going to pay labor, etc., the rest would come down to the equipment. So if you don't have a huge budget to work with, you're not going to get the most dynamic park. So I would say in years past, that's why so many playgrounds and parks stayed the same as they were, because there weren't enough dollars allocated to do major renovations of it. We might do partial renovation if we can, or add features such as new plantings or things of that nature, adding trees, because obviously green space and trees are very important for our parks and for our ecology, you know. But I'd say with the monies that have come through the Community Parks Initiative and mayoral funds, we've been able to obviously go beyond what was done in the past. So I would say the percentage is I can't give you an exact number, but I would say the percentages are definitely going to be higher going forward, because there aren't going to be playgrounds that you would say, oh, well, there's nothing for a child with a disability to do here. You know, or there are steps, you have to go all the way there to find the accessible entrance. Sometimes that's a turnoff for a parent with a child with a disability. Why do I always have to come through the back entrance versus coming through the main entrance where everyone else is? Maybe there was a topography or grade change that maybe before, back in the day, we didn't have monies to obviously make it universally accessible. And maybe because the ADA wasn't even really enforced back then. But now we're on a different, I'd say we're putting our playgrounds on a different pedestal and treating them as such. And that would come down to our Chief of Design, Nancy Prince, who works with all of our boroughs, our unit leaders and our team leaders who oversee our designers and architects. And kind of like I mentioned, it's like we have the monies now, let's make the best possible playground that we can, obviously universally accessible. So I would say the percentage is a lot higher within the last few years than they were, say, maybe 10 years ago. Big time, big time. But I would say the percentage is definitely going to be increased as more parks are opened. Kirsten.
How about subway access to parks, and do you have any weight, can you influence that in development and maintenance?
For subway access to parks?
Yes.
Meaning, can we construct a subway entrance in a park?
Can you make sure that the subway has an elevator? I mean, if someone's going
Oh.
to like Rockaway, they have to go
No.
to Flatbush and then ride a Q35
No.
all the way.
No, and I've been in that situation before, especially if the elevator's broken. But that's obviously the MTA, so that wouldn't necessarily fall into our purview. But we would hope that more stations are made accessible. But as I mentioned, it comes down to budgeting. I'm sure putting in an elevator in a number of stations is very expensive. It can be done. It just comes down to dollars. But yeah, that would be, I think that would be two separate.
Just wondering if you can cram the whip.
Well, I can't necessarily, but we do have a mayor's office for persons with disabilities who oversees a number of the disabled consumers' concerns and try to make sure that on the government side, we understand it as well, so that we can try to make sure that the public is accommodated. Our Commissioner Victor Calisi does a very good job of that. So I'm sure he's in the current lawsuit, of which I can't speak of, because I am a city employee, even though MTA is state funded, but still, that's an ongoing lawsuit, I believe. But yeah, I can't pull any strings with that. Wish I could, because as a person with a disability, I have come into the situation where an elevator would be handy at a certain station versus taking a bus to an elevator. It happens, but the thing I'm thankful for is that New York City does have elevators that are in use when working, and obviously I've used them to travel around the city. So I would say, but I don't have any pull. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had a question too about that.
Yep.
I know you mentioned that the older parks were one of the prioritizations for
Yes.
your kids, 20 to 25 years hasn't been updated.
Yeah.
If the community had an interest in advocating for like a specific park, like what's the most effective way to communicate with the city?
Well, I would say send a letter to the mayor. 311, send a letter to the mayor through mayoral correspondence. And as a city employee, we get those letters all the time, whether it's a complaint, a compliment, a request. But I believe in the beginning of the mayor's term, I believe he reached out to the communities. And I believe our commissioner, who was a planner himself, I believe we reached out to the communities to kind of see, and obviously looking at our books and basically saying, okay, when was the last time these parks were reconstructed? So I'm sure we provided a level of access on our side for the mayor to choose. But with the Community Parks Initiative, I think it's just a great idea because you got to think, when parks were first created, it was to put in urban neighborhoods so that kids don't necessarily have to play in the street as they were, but go to playgrounds and have a nice, safe environment to play in. So with our recreation side and our Community Parks Initiative Summer Sports Experience, we're bringing kids back to the playgrounds and have a level of programming in the playgrounds for them to do during the summer so that they get used to being in that park that's currently old, which is going to be reconstructed. And usually reconstruction of a playground or park takes anywhere from 2 years, sometimes more. I don't think people realize the level of approvals that a park or a playground has to go through. And I would say if we rush it, if you rush anything, what do you get? Something that's not really favorable or something that's not good. Looks rushed. So I'm not saying that our playgrounds can obviously be done like this or can't be done like this, but we try to make sure that we get them designed and constructed as soon as possible. But yeah, I would say they did look back at a template and say which parks haven't been redesigned in a number of years. I'm sure we gave them that information. And also with community input. As I mentioned before, even for the CPI parks, we went to the communities and had scope meetings and said, hey, what would you like to see in this playground? What would you like to see in this park? You know, and the community has input, and it's great because it gives the designers a framework. Okay, this percentage of people said they need this, and we want this, and we want this. Okay, how can we incorporate that into this design? So it actually helps the designers with community input. And then obviously the community gets something that they were in favor of in the beginning and they had input on. So yeah, so I believe we did do some research for the mayor, and I'm sure there was community input. But I commend him for putting monies up to improve our neighborhoods, playgrounds, and etc. Playgrounds and parks are very important to our livelihoods. Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering if this would be tied in to the discretionary funding. That's a way to appeal to get more funding. New York City has a discretionary funding. So I don't know if that's something that's a possible.
Well, I know that goes to not-for-profits at times, but we do get a number of funding from the council persons. Yeah, so they do use a number of dollars. Like a lot of times when I see it, and you know, you see a council person, and obviously they might have a number of parks in their district or their areas, and they're putting millions of dollars here and there. You know, it's not easy, but they are using their monies towards parks. I think that's why they really want to kind of see the results of their monies, especially before they are termed out or before the next election comes, because they are putting that money into the communities for the persons that obviously voted for them or the ones that didn't vote for them. But I applaud all of them for the monies that they did put up and put into these parks. And hopefully, like I said, they're pleased with what was done. And for parks that maybe they might have put partial monies up and the mayor put other monies up, and it might have been a small playground. There was something recently in the playground, in the newspaper, sorry, of a park that's across the street from a nursing home. And this park, it was a small park, and it's in Queens, and it was sitting there, and it was green space, but it wasn't really fully developed. And the council person, along with our Queens Borough Commissioner for Parks, worked to make it so it's almost like a respite area, where basically, a person who might be going through a lot, a senior or a person, that's very ill, can actually go there with their family and kind of just have an area to relax. It's not a lot of noise, it's not a playground, it's just a lot of green space, water fountains, benches, obviously with our companion seating. And, for things like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a big glamorous playground or park. Sometimes it could be something like a small community garden that maybe takes a couple $100,000 to enact, but that comes from local councilman person, so they do use it wisely.
I even think in some of those parks, they can put in plants that have, for the visually impaired, they can
Yes.
actually touch the plants.
Yes.
It's tactile, it's very fragrant.
Yep, I'll go back to that slide. We actually do have that. We have it in a number of our playgrounds and parks. Here we go. Our sensory gardens.
Yes.
Yeah, that's for children with developmental delays or for children within the autism spectrum, who are the brightest kids. I mean, they have a level of disability, and sometimes people think that because of what they present, they're not, comprehending what's going on. But from the programs that we work in on our recreation centers and dealing with a number of District 75 schools, etc., these children are so bright, and you just have to give them a resource. You have to give them somewhere where they can actually, be in tune with their abilities, not necessarily their disability, because sometimes they're left out of the mix, especially children with developmental disabilities or delays, especially children with the autism spectrum. You could think 10, 15 years ago, people weren't talking about autism as they are now, because there are a lot more children who are being diagnosed. And we need to provide resources for them so that they can play along with other children and go to these parks. And our designers take that into account as well, especially with a number of our ground level play features, such as you see the color wheel. Yep, I'm gonna get to you, Sean. But the color wheel and things of that nature, and smelling the different fragrances of the flowers in our playgrounds and things of that nature. We have a level of responsibility to children with various disabilities, so we definitely include that, especially the scope, meaning if a family comes and says, hey, we have a number of children with these types of disabilities or this level of disability in our neighborhood, our designers go back and take that into account and try to accommodate them in a design. So as I mentioned, you're gonna see some pretty cool parks coming out in the next couple of years. I can guarantee that. Yep, Sean.
So that touched on another question that I had, which was so you've been talking a lot about the parks and the equipment and the designs of them, but what kind of programs do you have for people with disabilities within the park system?
Perfect. We have our adaptive sports, and that's within our recreation centers, and we do outdoor sports as well. And that's what I'm part of, and I also have a gentleman who helps assist me in our recreation, Rodolfo Guevara, along with our commissioners for recreation, who definitely access to go over and beyond to provide programming. So we do have, for example, we have adult day programs where children are aged out of the school system, so because they have Medicaid, they need things to do in the daytime while their families are at work. So they generally get with programs that are able to bus them around in vans to different areas of, recreation, or, for them to, keep their minds moving and not keep them idle. So we have a number of computer programs that we are in our recreation centers that we have programming where they can come in and work on our computers and do different type of programming there. We have a number of recreation programs in our rec centers that are catered to persons with disabilities. We have a number of adaptive sports that we play, as well as teams. So with our adaptive sports, obviously, adaptive sports are sports made for persons with disabilities to play a sport, but they might be a wheelchair user or have limited mobility. So we have a number of our teams, the New York Mets, Yankees, Jets, Giants, Knicks, Nets, Rangers. They all have adaptive sport teams and provide uniforms for the children to play with, and adults for the most part, and they travel around the country playing other professionally sponsored teams. So for example, we have our New York Rolling Knicks, who is #1 in the country for wheelchair basketball. But I believe this year they lost to the Dallas Mavericks sponsor team, so that kind of sucks. But you know, because they were pretty good, you know. But yeah, so we do a number of recreation activities in our recreation centers, but definitely our computer labs. We have a number of individuals with disabilities that use our computers, and we have programming on them for them to use. So we try to do as much as we can within our recreation centers, and as well outside of our recreation centers. A lot of times we have these programs that come to our play spaces with children with disabilities, or sometimes adults. And we hope to have more community response for persons with disabilities to our summer sports experiences, meaning that we do recruit a number of children from our recreation centers that live in a local neighborhood and then bring them to the parks to play. We, you know, obviously bus them out to the parks, and these are children without disabilities. But what we would like to do is get more inclusion from persons with disabilities, especially developmental disabilities and autism, to participate in these programs. We actually do training for our summer sports experience staff to show them what do you do if you have a person with various disabilities come to your summer camp or come to your summer sports experience. You know, just to kind of give them that experience of what to do when a child with autism is having spasms or a tantrum because there's so much noise and they can't take the noise. How do you calm that child down? You know, those are very important things to keep kids safe. So we try to teach our staff that as well if they ever come into that situation. But we would definitely like to have more inclusion for children, teens, and adults with disabilities to participate in our programs. So hopefully this gets out to them and they say, hey, you know, send us a 311 response. Hey, we have a group of kids with autism. How can we get them to participate in your summer programs? That'd be great. That'd be awesome, because that's what our staff is looking forward to doing this summer and every summer afterwards. Yep. No problem.
So to disseminate that information, is that something that's posted on websites, or is it circulated via newsletter, you know, to actually inform?
Well, we do have a section for accessibility on our website. It lists a lot of programming that's going on catered to disability sports. And we also have another one that lists all of the current events that are going on, not necessarily sports related, but just events. It could be movie night in the parks. It could be, we have so many things going on in the summer. You know, outdoor summer ballets. You know, we have a lot of swim programs at our pools. All of our pools have an ADA lift, so if a person does have limited mobility, everyone can access our pools. Every pool has a pool lift, a working pool lift, and we make sure of that because we would never want someone who needs help getting into a pool not able to get into a pool. And say they take a paratransit there, an Access-A-Ride in New York City. The Access-A-Ride drops them off at 1 and is going to pick them up at 4, but they find out the pool lift isn't working. So that means that person's at the pool for 3 hours. No. So we make sure it's not a good experience.
You don't want that call.
No, we don't want. I don't want that 311 call. But what I've done, as well as Commissioner Khaleesi when he was in my role, is make sure that we have the proper pool lifts that can withstand the weather, the heat, and won't break down often. And I believe we found that type of lift using hydraulic lifts, obviously versus battery operated. That works well in the summer, and it's just using the pressure of a water hose. And that works the best. And we've had persons with disabilities up to 300 pounds who've used our lift on that hydraulic system, and it's worked out well. So we kind of go with what works, but it's trial and error. Yep.
I know you have tech centers in the parks, right? You know, where they teach computer stuff?
Well, we do that in our parks. We do that. We have nature labs as well. But tech outside, I'm sure there might be a park or
I know because when
maybe
I
a
go
play.
to this computer science NYC meetup, which I shoot,
Yep.
they have people from the parks that are always promoting these tech centers. I've never been to one.
Sure, they might. Well, we have them in our recreation centers. I don't know if we actually do it outdoors.
Okay.
I can check and see. But yeah, but we do have them in a lot of our rec centers. We have computer labs and fully accessible labs with tons of programming on our computers, Macs as well as PCs. So that's probably what they were doing. We have some playgrounds where we do have Wi-Fi. We have rec centers where we do have Wi-Fi. So if you kind of want to listen to music while you're working out using our Wi-Fi system, you can do that as well. So we are getting up to a level of technology where it's making it better for the user. Yeah, but it's an important level of access. And we try to, like we mentioned before, we try to be cutting edge, we try to raise the bar. So you could think, oh, well, this is the New York City Parks Recreation Center. What can they offer me? I can go to, I'm not going to say names, but I can go to this place and this place and this place. You'd be surprised what you can do in our recreation centers across the city. I definitely encourage you to go to your local recreation center and check it out, Yeah. And for the price that you're paying for membership, you can't beat it. And it has access to indoor pools year-round, any indoor pool in the city once you become a member. Now, obviously, our outdoor pools are all free, as well as our beaches. But our rec centers, that's a great deal. It's a great bargain, I would definitely say. No? Any more questions?
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Oh, wow. Time flies. I didn't even realize this. But this has been a great group. So thank you for the questions and thanks for listening.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming out.
No problem, Sean. Thank you for having me.
To Bob for hosting us, and thank you to Jolly for handling this for the Internet Society, and SSB Bar for the sponsorship, and thank you, Stanley, for capturing all of this.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.